Hi folks, I'm Ignatiy Vishnevetsky.
And I'm Alex Dowd.
We are at Club Lago restaurant, just around the corner from the AV Club office.
Film Club is brought to you by the new Windows 10.
Imagine a future with no passwords, where web pages are meant to be scribbled on and shared, and devices will listen to you and talk back.
The future starts now for all of us. Get started today, Windows 10. So I think a lot of people were pretty nervous, myself included, about the idea of Roland Emmerich, the disaster movie maestro who made Independence Day and Day After Tomorrow, about him making a movie about the Stonewall Riots in New York in 1969. But I actually don't think that Emmerich is necessarily the big problem with Stonewall. If you think about it, all of his films are sort of about this dismantling of iconography. And, you know, I mean, he's destroying the White House, he's destroying the Hollywood sign, he's reducing these great cities to rubble. And Stonewall, on a much smaller scale, is about a group of people who are dismantling this outdated idea of America.
On a conceptual level, it makes perfect sense in many ways. And I like Emmerich's movies in general. And I like them for I do. I like them for that precise reason, because they are all about identifying these icons or these kind of touchstones of popular culture and then blowing them up. It's a very simple MO, but I like it. But the thing is that Emmerich's never really shown, even in the good movies, he's never shown much in the way of sensitivity or really subtlety.
Right.
And
subtlety is not his strong suit.
I think it's one of the problems here. I mean, this is a movie about the Stonewall Riots, and if you weren't coming into it with some background knowledge, would you be able to tell someone, just from watching the movie, what caused the riots?
No, and he does not contextualize it at all, but I would argue that's as much a script problem as it is an Emmerich problem. So the film has this flashback structure. The lion's share of it is set in New York, 1969, in the Village. But we also get these flashbacks to a few weeks earlier, when our main character, played by Jeremy Irvine, is a high school kid in Indiana, and sort of him getting outed in that period. And Emmerich treats that stuff like we're in a Norman Rockwell painting, you know? Yeah, the movie has inspired some sort of pre-release controversy because it takes a story about young black men and women, young Latino men and women in New York, and sort of filtered it through the experiences of this
of a white non-New Yorker.
Yeah, it's very Johnny Utah.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, it's basically about this guy who leaves a Norman Rockwell painting and then travels to New York and becomes friends with these like Lou Reed characters. That's basically the structure of this movie. It's a good way to put it. I don't think this is a good movie.
No,
but
it's not.
It looks a lot.
It's not an awful one though.
It's got some pretty bad moments. It's very hokey in portions. It is very hackneyed. There is an interesting thread there, and I think it's mostly in the portrayal of these street kids. And there's a moment where Danny, the main character, he confronts kind of one of his new friends about the fact that they steal so much, and is told, you know, that if I don't take something, then I have nothing. Which to me is a more interesting theme than the movie's very scattered portrayal of, you know, the early years of the gay rights movement, because there is this idea of criminality as a form of resistance. Because yeah, people are being exploited by, say, the owners of the Stonewall, but at least they're allowed to be customers.
Right, well there's a germ of an interesting idea too, that we're looking at this moment when there was sort of a crossroads for this community, and you have factions, you have people who say, what we need to be doing right now is we need to be blending in more.
Yeah.
And that's how we're going to achieve equal rights, that's how we're going to move forward. But then you have our main characters, at a time when it was dangerous to be visibly gay, saying, no, what we need right now is to confront people with this.
Yeah.
I think a smarter film would have investigated that division more.
Yeah, because there is this split between kind of militancy and assimilation, which are, I think, issues that come up in any political movement, in any civil rights movement. The problem is that this movie, I think, is so confused, and the result is that he can't tell this relatively straightforward story.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the only moment that Emmerich really seems totally engaged with this material and seems totally right for this material is the riot itself.
Yeah. Which he handles very well.
I mean, you could build this movie around the riot. We really only get one night of it, but the actual riots lasted for 4 nights, supposedly.
Yeah, we get one night, and it's compressed into like under 10 minutes of screen time.
Yep. And the really interesting stuff happened after the riot, too. I want a version of Stonewall that has the flashback structure, but the flashbacks are to the riots, and the rest of the material is to what happens after the riots.
Well, I think you should just go make your own Stonewall movie.
Sorry, you're right. I'm not a big Emmerich fan. He's not my blockbuster filmmaker of choice. I have some affection for The Day After Tomorrow. because it commits to its silliness in a lot of ways. I mean, you have characters literally running from deadly frost as though it were a velociraptor. And that's a very funny idea.
And yet you don't like 2012.
I hate 2012. 2012, to me, sort of represents the worst of his instincts as this apocalypse fetishist, you know? We talked about liking the idea that he's destroying these monuments, because there's sort of a kid in the toy store quality to that.
But he gives you so much of that in 2012.
He does give you a lot of it, but he also gives you a lot of his sort of these glib little punchlines where we see these people who have sort of been placed there only to be a nasty punchline. I believe there's a scene in 2012 where this old woman is sort of walking down the street as the world is coming down around her, and she exists solely to be this punchline where I think she's just swallowed up by the planet.
Well, I do think he has a weakness for being glib. But you know what I really like, and I feel like this is the key to unlocking the whole Roland Emmerich canon, and that is Anonymous, which is his Shakespeare
Truther movie.
Shakespeare Truther movie, which I think is far and away his most personal film. This guy, who is, much like Emmerich, an art collector, basically uses the front of these very popular entertainments that are mostly about people killing each other to, to impart his messages. Now, it's not necessarily the most convincing defense of all of Emmerich's films, but I also find it really entertaining as a period genre piece.
Now, here's one I like. White House Down. But I wonder with that one, a part of it, I think, is nostalgia for the kind of blockbusters that Emmerich was making in the 90s.
It's a complete throwback to the early 90s. Yep. It's a Die Hard knockoff, Die Hard in the White House.
I feel like there's an interesting phenomenon in criticism where movies that bothered us when they were new can sort of gain an affectionate quality when you get some distance.
Yeah, I think of it as like aesthetic creep. Somehow, the stuff that seemed so loud and obnoxious in 1990 seems so classical and elegant in 2015.
Yeah. Well, it's also that you're immersed, when we're living in the now, we're immersed in the techniques of the now. There's always an element of, oh yeah, that's how they made movies then. Even bad 90s
I'm sorry, does that mean that Stonewall, 20 years from now, will be like, what a graceful...
Yeah, we're going to look back at Stonewall and just feel nostalgic for this era in Roland Emmerich's development.